If you think point clouds in Blender are hard to understand, trust me, you're not wrong, you're right. My name is Massimo and most of my art revolves around making point clouds inside Blender, and this video is a mini crash course on how to properly shade point clouds in Blender. So if you're interested in that, stick around because I'm gonna go over a lot of valuable stuff. First things first, let's start simple. I'm using Blender version 4.5, but this pretty much applies to nearly all the versions of Blender that do support point clouds. The process really hasn't changed too much since point clouds were introduced in, I believe, version 3.1, which now is like 3 years ago. In Blender version 4.5, actually point clouds are now officially supported as a data type in Blender. Apparently before they used to be experimental. And now you can individually move around the point cloud data type as well as increasing the size. And I believe color should be possible as well, but I don't do it this way. Let me show you the way how I do it. Now in Blender, there's two main ways how to get a point cloud. It's either through a point cloud file or you're taking a mesh and turning it into points. So let me show both ways. Here's the mesh version. I'm just gonna drag and drop my mesh. And here's the mesh that we want to turn into points. And from here we go into geometry nodes and create a new geonodes. We can use distribute points on faces, or we can also use mesh to points. Both of them have a different look. It really just comes down to which look you prefer more. Just play around with both and see which one works better for your particular mesh. But I like to go with distribute points on faces because it does give a more consistent look. Then from there, we can also change the point radius with the set point radius node. And I'm gonna make it a little bit lower and increase the number of points. So now we have this. And here's where the issue comes. If you hop into shading, right now my world's set to black, so I'm gonna bring it up. But you can see that we do have a material assigned to this object, but why isn't the point cloud material showing? That's because we gotta grab a set material and we gotta set the material to the material itself, which is material underscore 0. But then again, it's not showing the material. The reason why is because point clouds are a little bit finicky and they handle UV maps a bit differently compared to meshes in Blender. Hopefully this is the correct technical explanation, but meshes in Blender, they handle the UV maps internally. But when it comes to point clouds, you must explicitly reference the UV map. And the way to do that is if you hop into shading. Just a quick note, when it comes to shading in point clouds, for the most part, I typically only use the base or albedo color. I don't really use the normal or whatever other textures there are. This should be your setup, but the typical setup for shading is something like this. You can see that the UV map, when it's connected, it doesn't work. And the reason for that is because we have to use the UV map attribute. So if we go into object data and attributes, we need to find a face corner 2D vector attribute, and whatever the name of that is what we use. Most of the time, the default is named UV map, but it could be named something else. So you need to make sure here that you're using the right attribute. So let's just plug that UV map attribute in. A little shortcut is you just search the name of the attribute instead of bringing in the attribute node. But if you can't find the attribute name, then you can always just search for the attribute node itself. Plug this in, and then now we have the point cloud working properly. And this is the basic setup for a point cloud shader in Blender. I like to also bring the roughness down to 0.3 and the metallic to 1. And this is my basic go-to setup. So we went over mesh, but I'll quickly breeze over how to handle if you're importing a POY file, ply file, whatever you want to call it. And it just comes in like this. It's a bunch of vertices, not even the point cloud data type. And from here, we'll make a new geometry nodes. And this one, we can't use distribute points on faces because there aren't any faces. We're going to use mesh to points. And once we plug that in, then it's working properly. We get all the individual points. And the issue here when we're using POY files is we don't have any shaders. We have to create one. So we're gonna name this one ply shader, but you can name it whatever you want. And we're gonna set the material and set it to ply shader. If we go into shading, you can see this one has a similar issue. There's nothing showing. And now instead of grabbing a UV map attribute, we're looking for an attribute that has a vertex color attribute. So you're gonna go here and whatever the name of it is, when it comes to UV maps, the default is UV map, but with color attributes, the default should be col or color So you want to put that in. It might be different for your object or ply file. So you just want to make sure. Meshes can also have vertex color attributes. Just wanted to mention that. But you want to make sure you type it incorrectly because it is case sensitive. And then once we plug that in, then you can see the color for this point cloud is now showing properly as well. And then do the typical setup for that. It's just 3 nodes. It's really not that complicated. But that being said, point clouds can get very complicated inside Blender. Let's hop into something more intermediate on how you can make a procedural point cloud effect. So before I hop into that, if you're really interested in all this point cloud stuff, and if you want to learn more about how to scan, shade, render, just the entire process from start to finish, I have this Blender point cloud course. So if you want to learn more about that, I have it linked below. Now, when it comes to procedural shading, it's quite similar as procedurally shading anything else in Blender, but there are a few quirks. Let's make something that it's like a ring growing from the center of the mesh and growing out. And I'll show you very quickly how to make that. So the way to do that is with a wave texture, and let's set it to rings, and let's do spherical. And from there, you can see we already have some sort of effect where it's kind of growing from the center. So let's bring down the scale to like 0.25. This is something that does look better. And if we want to adjust the center of it, we can just use generated coordinates. I brought this in with Node Wrangler. So many people talk about how to enable the Node Wrangler add-on. I'm not gonna say it because it's just so redundant, but it's very easy to do. You can do a quick Google search on it. With this mapping node, you can manipulate the position where the rings emit from, so to speak. And if you want even finer control, you can just grab in the empty and use object coordinates. So let's use that empty. And once we have that empty selected and the object coordinates plugged in, we don't even need this mapping node. We could get rid of that. But now we have an empty that we can scale. In this case, rotation wouldn't show, but we can scale and then also move it around. So we have more finer control over this shader. And let's just give a simple effect of like red rings. And the way to do that is with a color ramp. This node, what it does is it remaps values by default. It's not gonna change anything, but I wanna make it red. So if we bring up the saturation, now it's red. And I want to make the rings a little bit more tight. So we set it like this, set it to ease. And then one trick I like to do is instead of ease, actually B-spline. And then you have more granular control over the way it kind of like falls off. So I'm actually, yeah. So now you have a better look of how things look like, just like that. And then from there, what I can do is this can be a value driving emission and just plug it in here. And now we have an emission shader. And then we can add it on top of our other original texture. So now we have something a little bit more advanced, and you can animate this with phase offset. Instead of doing all of this like driver stuff, I mean, you could do like frame divided by 100, or let's make it a little bit, you could do frame divided by 10 to give it like this animated look, or even reverse it. But I actually made a node for that in my point cloud shaders. I'm gonna talk more about it in just a second, but here's a little sneak peek. I have the scene time node, which I actually brought in from geometry nodes and ported it over into Blender shading. And now I have a clock that I have just plug in the values, no drivers needed. I'll be talking about those shaders in just a little bit, but let's see what we came up with. Now we have a point cloud that has reflection and also emission. It gives us a really nice look. Let's actually add, not make the world transparent. You can see this is just a plain white background, but if we add in a sky texture, now you can see that we kind of have more of an aesthetic pleasing look, because at this moment we're only working on shading, not lighting. Lighting is a whole nother rabbit hole, but you can see we have reflection as well as emission. We can also change the emission strength. And this right here could be a final look. You have the point cloud and everything set up. You can even control it with the empty here, just like that. And since my older point cloud tutorials, actually point clouds do work in Eevee as well now, which is such a big plus for people that are running Blender on a computer that doesn't have such a beefy GPU. But also I do like to use this for previews and previs. Like if I'm sending work to clients, it's just so much easier to render like a preview in Eevee instead of doing the full-blown cycles. And the results are, cycles is obviously better, but Eevee is kind of close. And then one more thing with point clouds in Blender, they also shade based off of per pixel. But if you want to do it per point, you could do point info node, and you get some additional parameters here that you can use to control your shaders in Blender. But if you plug it in via point, it's not too apparent here, but they're shaded by each individual point instead of per pixel. And you can see it does make a difference here. It really just depends on what kind of effect you want. If you find all this stuff confusing, the truth is, it is, which is why I made a point cloud shader pack. So I'll show you quickly what that shader pack is capable of. Let's use this same model. Matter of fact, this 3D model that I'm using, that I've been playing around with for this whole time, is included for free in that point cloud shader pack. But let's see what we can make with it. Here's what it comes with. It comes with 10 materials and also 4 tools. So let's just grab matrix, drag and drop it in and plug it in. To spice it up even more, I can mix any of the 10 shaders together. So it's not just 10 shaders. Honestly, a lot of them are very customizable. You can see that that previous effect we worked on, this is an upgraded version of it that's already set up. You get a whole lot more controls. We also have that per point domain toggle where things are shaded either per point or per pixel. So what's another thing we can add to this to spicing it up? So let's bring in also Twinkle. This is another shader in the pack. Plug that in and let's bring in the Twinkle percent. And also the speed, let's change to 1. And now we have a little bit more of a dynamic look, but it's still missing that final touch. Let's add a rim light. And I want to make the rim distance higher, but let's make it also very subtle. So now we get a subtle outline of each individual point. And then the final cherry on top will be a glossy BSDF. For any of these shaders, you could plug it in and just like that, just bring down the black value and the roughness down. And now we have something more advanced and it's finished. So one last thing to do is let's change the emission settings. As you can see, this thing is very customizable. And this is with the world background, so let's turn it off. And after doing a bit of tweaking, I pretty much added 3 shaders from the pack. It's Matrix, Twinkle, and Rim Light, as well as a glossy BSDF. So you can see by just like adding and mixing all of these shaders, I get something that looks a lot more polished. And then I also have a lot more tools in this pack. If you want to learn more about it, I'm not going to go over everything. I have this linked below as well. If you want to speed up your shading workflow for specifically point clouds in Blender, this thing is a game changer. It took me quite a while to build it. And instead of spending hours to build your point cloud shaders, you could do it in minutes with this pack. I don't have any sponsors on my Blender stuff, so the best ways to support me are with these point cloud shaders, as well as my point cloud course. Links for the point cloud course, as well as the shader pack, will be linked down below. I just released point shaders, so there's an early bird special for the first 25 people that buy it. There's no promo code, you just gotta head down below, select the promotion. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments. If you found this video helpful, or if you just want to see more art content from me on YouTube, be sure to subscribe because I always have more coming. Thanks for making it to the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.